the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., the place where our nation's laws and policies are enacted and affect our day-to-day life. Legislation shapes how we live life, what we can and cannot do, what is right and what is wrong. Our government tries its best to satisfy the needs of the nation and conduct ethical decisions through the judicial process. But of course, it is impossible to be perfect.
So what decides if the law is ethical? If an action is the correct one or not? Our government tries its best to be as secular and impartial as possible when making these decisions. Of course, it is common for politicians to have personal bias or be swayed by lobbyists for a particular side. My name is Hayden Neal, and I want to talk about one of the most important forces that have shaped these policies and impact the lives we have today. A force that has been around since the Constitution was written. Religion.
To understand how religion influences American politics today, we have to look all the way back to the first colonists. While most early European colonizers came to America seeking economic opportunity or glory, many groups, including the Puritans, Quakers, and Pilgrims, were fleeing persecution in search of religious freedom. For them, religion wasn't separate from law. It was the law, shaping their morals, activities, sense of justice, and daily life. In Massachusetts, the Puritans punished blasphemy, enforced church attendance, and based their legal codes on scripture. These early systems blurred the line between spiritual authority and government, setting a precedent for how moral beliefs would continue to shape American law for centuries.
Even after decades passed and a revolution was underway, these traditions did not disappear, but evolved.
By the time the Founding Fathers gathered in Philadelphia, religion was already deeply embedded in the nation's DNA. They wrote the Constitution and the First Amendment, which even affirms the separation of church and state. But history tells a more complicated story.
In their 2010 article, Sex, Secularism, and Religion, scholars Elizabeth Bernstein and Janet Jacobson pointed out that the idea of the separation of church and state came from early Protestant values. In the 19th century, Protestant leaders voted for this idea of secularism, not to get rid of religion and politics altogether, but to make sure that the government was not going to support Catholic institutions. Although America may seem like a secular democracy, its moral foundations has always been laid out by religious ideas, one that promotes one belief and while demotes the other. And this still occurs to our modern political debates today. Although the line between church and state may always seem to be there, it's impossible to tell where one ends and where the other begins.
In a study in 2022, Adler and colleagues surveyed local government officials across Pennsylvania. They found that religion's influence in politics isn't uniform, but varies by community in unexpected ways. Their data goes against the common expectation that rural communities are always more religious in public life. In reality, urban officials are more likely to engage openly with religious organizations because cities have larger, prominent religious networks. In smaller towns, religion is often strong, but it stays personal rather than public. However, when religion breaks the barrier of the private home into secular institutions like public schools, that is when it becomes a controversial constitutional issue.
For example, in 2025, Texas passed Senate Bill 10, which required every public school classroom to display the Ten Commandments. Supporters called it a return to American values and history, while critics argued it violated the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. States that mandate the Ten Commandments tend to have governments where conservative Christian identity is deeply tied to political symbolism. Posting the commandments becomes less about history and more about signaling cultural values to voters. And this doesn't contradict Adler's thesis, for he measured public religious activism, which is strongest in urban areas. These laws reflect identity-based religion in rural conservative states, where faith shapes political symbols, even if it isn't expressed through large public institutions.
This matters because when the state chooses one religious tradition to elevate, it reshapes the entire environment students grow up in. And the reality is that what's normal in Texas classrooms might be unconstitutional in New York or California.
These differences show how religion continues to guide political decisions that shape everyday life, even for people who don't share the same beliefs. Religion still frames how Americans view politics today, even when we can't see it. From abortion to LGBTQ rights to welfare programs, the moral language used in these debates often echoes religious values. In a 2025 Pew Research report, Americans who attend church regularly or identify as highly religious were far more likely to say the government should do less to help the poor, while those who are less religious often support more government aid. The same divide appears across social issues and services. Religiosity consistently predicts how people think the government should act. In addition, Karen Armstrong explains in her book Fields of Blood how religious rhetoric has shaped political power and social norms for centuries, defining what societies consider morally acceptable. Although religion does not directly cause violence or war, Armstrong argues that violence comes from political power struggles that use religious symbols and language to justify themselves. In modern U.S. debates, religious rhetoric still guides how voters interpret policies, whether they realize it or not. All of this shows that political debates aren't just about policies. They're about competing moral visions rooted from different religious traditions. Understanding these helps explain why Americans often disagree so intensely and why compromise on these issues can be difficult. Religion doesn't just influence laws, it also shapes who Americans see capable enough to lead. In their 2017 study, Aaron Cassisi and Muriel Holman found that many religious traditions often reinforce gender hierarchies, making men appear naturally authoritative and women less legitimate as leaders. They also found that Americans who are more religious are more likely to support traditional gender roles, while those less religious favor progressive ideals. One clear example of this appears in modern elections. During the 2020 and 2024 campaigns, several prominent conservative pastors and religious leaders referred to Vice President Kamala Harris as a Jezebel, a biblical figure symbolizing immoral and dangerous women. Historically, that label has been used to undermine women who speak too boldly or hold positions of authority. This isn't just an insult, it's religious rhetoric being used to question a woman's legitimacy as a leader. It shows how gender and faith intertwine in American politics, influencing public perception, voting behavior, and even who is seen as morally qualified to govern. Understanding this helps us see how religion quietly shapes leadership and decision-making in government, even when laws appear secular or politically neutral. Religion doesn't just influence individual beliefs, it can magnify political divisions. As political scientist Robert D. Campbell explains, when religious identity and political identity become tightly linked, polarization deepens. People stop evaluating policies based on personal ethics and instead align their moral judgments with the party they support. We see this in modern debates over issues like reproductive rights, transgender healthcare, and school curriculum. These aren't just policy disagreements, they're treated as moral battles, with each side believing they are defending a deeper truth. This ping-pong between church and state shows that public opinion is shaped not only by facts or policies, but by faith, identity, and the moral narratives people hold. Religion isn't just a private belief, it's a force that shapes society, voting behavior, and the policies that pass or fail. From the Puritans to modern Americans, religion has always shaped the way we understand morality, community, and leadership. Laws and policies may appear secular, but they are rooted in long-standing religious values. Research shows that highly religious Americans prioritize different political issues than those who are less religious, shaping everything from elections to public policy. But this isn't just a story about the past, it matters right now. Because when religion and politics intertwine, they determine who gets represented, what values become law, and whose voices get left out. The more our political debates rely on competing moral visions, the harder it becomes for Americans to understand each other and find common ground. So the real question isn't whether religion should influence American politics, it's how we, as citizens, choose to navigate a country where beliefs are powerful enough to shape policy, identity, and national direction. Understanding these influences make us better voters, better neighbors, and better human beings altogether. Because in a country built on both faith and freedom, the future of our politics depends on how well we understand the beliefs that guide us.